Israeli-Palestinian conflict, prepare to delve into the genesis of one of the world's longest-standing disputes. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a saga of struggle and strife, has its roots deeply embedded in the annals of history. A tale of two peoples, each with a fervent claim to the same land, this conflict has been a defining element of the Middle East for over a century. The inception of this conflict can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. During this time, the Ottoman Empire, an ancient and vast dominion, held sway over much of the Middle East, including the land known as Palestine. It was against this backdrop that the first seeds of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were sown. In the twilight years of the 19th century, a wave of Jewish immigration to Palestine began. This movement, spurred by the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and Russia, marked the beginning of a significant demographic shift in the region. Simultaneously, the Zionist movement, advocating for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, began to gain momentum. The Zionist ideology, born out of a long history of Jewish persecution and the dream of a national refuge, resonated with many Jewish immigrants. However, it also sowed the seeds of discontent among the local Arab population of Palestine, who viewed this influx of immigrants and the growing Zionist sentiment as a direct threat to their homeland's demographic and cultural fabric. As the 20th century dawned, these tensions began to escalate. The increasing rate of Jewish immigration, coupled with the political and cultural implications of the Zionist movement, created a pressure cooker of resentment and fear. This early period of friction and fear, marked by competing nationalisms and clashing aspirations, set the stage for the monumental conflict that was to follow. This early period sowed the seeds for the century-long conflict that was to follow. Tune in for the next chapter, where we explore the role of the British in this complex narrative. The British Mandate for Palestine, a crucial period, played a significant role in shaping the conflict we see today. To understand how, we need to rewind to the early 20th century. The Balfour Declaration, issued in November 1917, was a public statement by the British government expressing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This was a significant moment, but it also had its complications. The declaration was a product of its time, fueled by British strategic interests and a genuine belief in the Zionist cause. However, it also contained a caveat, stating that this new national home should not prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. This clause was intended to protect the interests of the Arab majority living in Palestine, but in reality, it set the stage for increasing tensions. During the British Mandate period, which spanned from 1920 to 1948, Britain found itself in a precarious position, attempting to balance these conflicting promises. Jewish immigration to Palestine increased significantly during this time, driven in large part by the horrors of the Holocaust. This influx of Jewish immigrants, however, was met with resistance and hostility from the Arab population, who saw their land and resources becoming increasingly scarce. The British, struggling to maintain control and keep the peace, ultimately decided to limit Jewish immigration in the late 1930s, a decision that further inflamed tensions. This period saw the rise of armed resistance from both Jewish and Arab factions, leading to a cycle of violence that would continue for decades. The end of the British Mandate in 1948 marked the withdrawal of British forces from Palestine, leaving a power vacuum in its wake. This set the stage for the next chapter of the conflict, a chapter characterized by war, displacement, and ongoing struggle for land and identity. The end of the British Mandate set the stage for the next chapter of the conflict. In 1948, a pivotal year in history, the State of Israel was born, sparking the First Arab-Israeli War. This was a year of significant change when the United Nations approved a plan to partition the British Mandate of Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, announced the creation of a new Jewish state, Israel. This declaration, however, was met with immediate military reaction from neighboring Arab states: Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. These five nations objected vehemently to the creation of Israel. They believed the partition plan was unfair, favoring the Jewish minority over the Arab majority in Palestine. This disagreement culminated in the First Arab-Israeli War, also known as the War of Independence for Israelis, or the Nakba, meaning catastrophe, for Palestinians. The war was brutal and fierce, lasting for around 10 months. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Israel, despite being newly formed and vastly outnumbered, managed to hold its ground and even expand its territory beyond the boundaries set by the United Nations partition plan. The outcomes of the war were profound and far-reaching. For Israelis, it meant the survival and consolidation of their newly formed state. They saw it as a victory, a triumph of a people long persecuted throughout history. For Palestinians, however, it was a disaster. Hundreds of thousands were displaced from their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring Arab countries or in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This war set the stage for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that persists to this day. It was a transformative period that shaped the Middle East and altered the course of history. The wounds from this war run deep and are still felt by both Israelis and Palestinians. The aftermath of the war left both sides with deep scars, fueling further conflict. The First Arab-Israeli War was not just a historical event, but a harbinger of the enduring strife that continues to plague the region. The following decades witnessed several wars and uprisings, each intensifying the strife. Our journey through history takes us first to the Six-Day War in June of 1967. Israel's victory in this conflict resulted in a significant territorial expansion, capturing the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. This victory was a turning point as it marked a shift in the balance of power and set the stage for future negotiations over these territories. 5 years later, on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, October 1973, Israel was caught off guard by a surprise attack from Egypt and Syria. Despite the initial shock, Israel managed to rally and ultimately repel the attackers. The Yom Kippur War was a wake-up call for Israel, showcasing the need for constant vigilance and readiness. In the wake of these wars came the intifadas, or uprisings. These were periods of intensified Israeli-Palestinian violence. The first intifada, which began in 1987, was a largely civilian uprising against Israeli occupation. The second intifada, starting in 2000, was far more violent and deadly, with numerous suicide bombings and military operations. These events had profound impacts on the political and social landscapes of Israel and Palestine. The wars led to a change in territorial boundaries, a shift in power dynamics, and a heightened sense of insecurity. The intifadas, on the other hand, brought the plight of the Palestinians into global focus and intensified the animosity between the two sides. Each of these conflicts and uprisings left deep scars on both Israeli and Palestinian societies, fueling a cycle of violence, mistrust, and retaliation. The resulting political instability made negotiations and peace talks all the more difficult as both sides hardened their stances and became increasingly unwilling to compromise. These events further complicated the situation, making a peaceful resolution even more elusive. Today, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains unresolved, with both sides holding firm to their claims. The complexity of the conflict is further deepened by the issues of settlements, borders, and the status of Jerusalem. These are not merely political disputes, but rather, they are profound disagreements rooted in deep-seated historical narratives and identities. Israeli settlements continue to be a point of contention. These are communities established by Israel on lands occupied during the 1967 Six-Day War. They are viewed by many in the international community as a violation of international law and an obstacle to peace, while Israel disputes this. Then we have the question of borders. The Green Line, the armistice line drawn after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, is considered by many to be the future borders of a Palestinian state. However, the line does not account for the significant changes on the ground since 1948, including the aforementioned settlements. The status of Jerusalem is another thorny issue. Both Israelis and Palestinians see the city as their undivided and eternal capital. Yet, Jerusalem is home to the holy sites of three major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, making its status a matter of international concern. Behind these political and territorial disputes lies a heavy human cost. Thousands of lives have been lost and countless more have been affected by the ongoing conflict. The daily lives of people in the region are punctuated by fear and uncertainty, and the hope for a peaceful resolution often seems distant. Despite these challenges, international efforts towards peace persist. The United Nations, the European Union, and other international bodies, aided by countries like the United States and Russia, continue to mediate and propose solutions. These efforts, while often met with obstacles, underline the importance of dialogue and negotiation in the path to peace. While the path to peace remains steep and winding, understanding the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict provides us with essential context to comprehend the complexity